Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And this is our honor to have Dr. Corbin for our 2023 Internationally Distinguished Scholar Lecture Series speaker. I would like to introduce Dr. Hans van der Mars to introduce Dr. Corbin.
Thank you, Hosun. Well, good morning, everyone. It's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Charles Corbin. Dr. Corbin is Professor Emeritus at Arizona State University, and though he officially retired in 2005, he continues to be actively engaged in advancing the vision and mission of physical education and kinesiology in numerous ways through his advocacy, his mentorship, scholarship, and service. For over half a century, Dr. Corbin has been a true statesman of innovation and leadership in physical education and kinesiology. His work has focused primarily on promoting youth physical activity and health, youth fitness testing, his pioneering work in the areas of fitness education, and his passion for conveying the relevance of research to practitioners as well as the public at large. He is widely known nationally and internationally, having delivered invited and keynote addresses in Australia, Brazil, Canada, England, Ireland, and many other countries, as well as the United States, of course, including keynote addresses in nearly every state of the nation. Moreover, his work, his best-known work, Fitness for Life, has been translated in countless different languages. Chuck is the true father of what has become known as conceptual physical education. He is perhaps best known for his widely used Fitness for Life curriculum and instruction model that is focused on helping school-aged youth from K through 12 become informed fitness consumers and adopt a physically active lifestyle. But his model extends from kindergarten all the way through college-age students. The countless honors and awards, of which there are too many to list here, that have been bestowed on him previously, also reflect the stature of his field. In this field, the words by famed Scottish humorist and singer Harry Lauder fittingly reflects Chuck's enduring legacy in the field of physical education. And I quote, "I could tell where the lamplighter was by the trail he left behind him." On a personal note, Chuck has been a close friend for years and continues to be a terrific mentor for me. He has been nothing but supportive and encouraging in anything that I have tried to engage in. He is the consummate professional who cares deeply for others. Moreover, he embodies what it is like to not only think, but also act in an inclusive manner. Therefore, I am thrilled to see Chuck recognized by being invited to do today's International Organization for Health, Sport, and Kinesiology Distinguished Scholar Lecture. Please welcome Dr. Charles Corbin.
Thank you so much, Osang and Hans, for your kind introduction. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to this distinguished group. I've chosen the topic 60 Years of Scholarship in Kinesiology and Physical Education. I thought you might like to see a map of the United States and see where I am. We're in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I live, and that's in the southwest part of the United States, as you can see there. This is, to some extent, a historical lecture speaking about my experiences. So to look back on history is inevitably distorted, according to Norman Pearson, a famous historian. So if I get something wrong, just remember this is my reflections based on my experience. I would like to make some disclaimers at the beginning. First of all, for those of you from all parts of the world, my focus is on the United States, where most of my experience is, and the examples that I use of scholarship are not meant to be all-inclusive, but rather some examples. Many of those examples are influenced by my own personal experience over the years. I graduated from the University of New Mexico undergraduate in 1960, taught elementary school, went to Illinois for my master's, back to New Mexico for a PhD with a psychology minor, a stint during the 60s at St. Michael's College as department head, University of Toledo as assistant professor. In the 60s and 70s, Texas A&M University as an associate professor. 71 to 82 at Kansas State University as professor and department head. From 82 to 2005 at Arizona State University as a professor. And as Dr. Vandermars pointed out, from 2005 to the present, professor emeritus. Historian John Gardner says that history never looks like history when you're living through it. And you're living through history now. Maybe you don't realize it. I guess when you get my age, you start to see that history is what you've experienced. And so I have a few messages that I like to deliver today, and I'll state these at the beginning and come back to them at the end. First of all, history and philosophy matters. I'll elaborate as I go. Things change. In our disciplines, in our professions, adaptation is essential to success because there are many societal, academic, and technical changes that I have experienced and all of you have and will experience. Scholarly expectations change. They're a moving target. What you're expected to do when you begin a career is not necessarily what you will be doing at the end of your career. So you need to prepare for change. And with that, I say that as a profession, as a discipline, and as a field, we should establish common goals and different roles and respect all roles, whether they be disciplinary, professional, and we should respect all forms of scholarship. And of course, that depends on your situation. I have defined the field of kinesiology as a combination of the disciplines, which I will elaborate on in my talk, and as you see here, exercise physiology, sports psychology, etc., as well as the professions. And in respecting roles, I mean, we need people in the disciplines who create the pieces of the puzzles, and those in the professions who put those pieces together and deliver them to the public through things like physical education, health education, and the other professional areas that I've listed here. And these are only some of those representations. In terms of scholarship, I rely on the work of Boyer in his book, Scholarship Reconsidered from 1990. And this includes all forms of scholarship, including discovery, integration, application, and teaching learning. Discovery is more aligned with the discipline area, a disciplinary background, as well as integration. And I'll detail this more as I go. Now, I said I was going to talk about 60 years, which would be principally from 1960 when I began my career to the present. Then I thought it would be appropriate to give you a little bit of background of what went on in the years ahead of my experience in the field. So I call the period from 1900 to 1950 the era of expanding horizons. Noted historian Roberta Park said in an article in the 1980s that physical education could be the Renaissance field of the 21st century. In her article, she mentioned that the Renaissance field of the 20th century was medicine. At that time, medicine was a struggling profession. It had non-scientific beginnings. Many doctors were blacksmiths and other people who just were willing to do surgeries and treat people. During the 20th century, they established strong training programs, developed a solid disciplinary or scientific base, and developed a strong profession with ethics, concerns for the patients, and oaths to do no harm. Park says that we could be that field in the current century, and during the 1900s, as we lead up to the period that we're currently in, our early leaders were medical doctors. And they established those teacher education colleges, much like medicine began to establish their training programs. There was an early European influence and an emphasis on physical education of the physical. Do something to people. Do use physical activity to make people into something. But later in the first part of that century, the new physical education came along, which was unique to the United States and America, and introduced the idea of education through the physical, that physical education is a tool for accomplishing many goals, not just building the physical. And as some people have argued, it could be education of the physical through the physical. Regardless, there was a professional focus. We were physical education. What we now call kinesiology was first started as physical education, and research was not primary, but the early research, especially in the hands of many medical doctors, were related to anthropometric measurements, fitness, and measurement in general. Later in 20th century, from 1930 to 1950, and 1950 would be when in the 50s is when I began my professional education. We were still focused on the profession of physical education. And according to an article in the Research Quarterly, the primary journal of physical education in 1955, Hertz indicated that the primary work was matters pertaining to curriculum and physiology, including anthropometry and measurement. They list in that article the leading researchers, and among those were Anna Espenshade at the University of California, who is in motor development, C.H. McCloy, who is a measurement expert, Karpovich, who is an exercise physiologist, and Curtin at Illinois, who is a exercise physiology expert. And it's interesting to note that all of them were textbook authors, integrators, as well as those in discovery. I mentioned Catherine Wells' book, Kinesiology, which in my view is primarily functional anatomy. So what we now call kinesiology as a field was then an area of study within physical education that dealt with the origin and insertion of muscles and the function of muscles. So during the 50s, when I was in high school and college, Sputnik came along in 57 and prompted in the United States a science movement and led the former president of Harvard University to criticize graduate programs in physical education as not adequately preparing people in the sciences. During this period of time, a group of scholars from the Big Ten, or a group of Midwestern colleges, began a study of the body of knowledge to try to determine what should physical education sciences be. So in that setting, which was the foundation of the new science that we now call kinesiology, the American College of Sports Medicine was founded in 1954. Cardiac rehab programs were founded by Wolf and Hellerstein, where we got people active rather than being passive after a heart attack. Epidemiology research became prominent with the work of Morris. I'll elaborate later. Sports science research became prominent. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile and had been tested and trained extensively using scientific methods. And in the 50s, a report came out in the Research Quarterly. It was called The Report That Shocked the President, and was later published in Sports Illustrated magazine, as you see. And this led to the founding of the President's Council on Youth Fitness, which was a cabinet-level agency in the United States government, and ultimately led to the development of youth fitness testing with the Ayford Youth Fitness Test in the late 1950s. All of that background leads me to my entry into the profession as an elementary school physical education teacher in 1960 and my subsequent graduate studies in what I call the era of subdisciplinary expansion. During the 1960s, there were separate men's and women's programs, and whether I'm not sure internationally to what extent this is true, but in the United States, there were men's physical education programs and women's physical education programs. And mine at the University of New Mexico was all men in our classes. We didn't share classes with the women in the undergraduate program. Coaching was often central to the program of physical education preparation, as it was for me. And many of the male faculty members were coaches, often spending more time coaching than they did teaching in the profession. Few of the faculty had doctoral degrees, and in my education, I had to take health and recreation classes that were included along with physical education, and we were said to be prepared to teach health education as well as physical education and could go to work as a recreation leader, all as a result of one undergraduate degree. Compared to today, there were few professional organizations. The American Association for Health, Physical Education, and Recreation, now Shape America, was our major association. For college professors, there was NCPEA for men and NAPECW for women. And of course, the American College of Sports Medicine was founded in 1954. Leading scholars could be elected as fellows in the exclusive American Academy of Physical Education. During the 60s, we maintained our professional emphasis, and the leaders of our field were primarily textbook authors and leading administrators, department heads, and deans. There were limited journals, JOPERD for teaching and application, the Physical Education Educator, the Journal of Phi Epsilon Kappa, National Men's Honorary was teaching and application. Quest of the Higher Education Association was the Journal for Integration, and the Research Quarterly was primarily the primary discovery journal. The Big Ten Body of Knowledge project moved on and outlined the scientific subdisciplines, and that can be seen in the article by Daniels in 1965. And of course, Franklin Henry is widely cited as the leader of the academic discipline movement when he wrote an article in JOPERD in 1964 outlining the need for disciplinary studies within the profession of physical education. Franklin Henry is often considered to be the father of motor behavior. During the 1960s in the United States, there was a dramatic increase in doctoral production. The table shown here shows that in 1960 to 64, a 5-year period, there were 546 doctoral degrees granted in our profession. The next 5 years, it doubled to 1,039. The next 5 years, it doubled again to 1,854, and then it leveled off and actually decreased in the 1980s as our field became flooded with people in the disciplinary doctoral studies. In the doctoral programs, disciplinary specialization was emphasized with subdisciplinary study in the areas that I outlined earlier, often called cross-disciplinary because they crossed over between our field and the fields of psychology, physiology, physics, chemistry, and so forth. During this period, there was dramatic development in laboratories, with exercise physiology being dominant and the soft sciences, social sciences, as they were referred to, coming later. There was a dramatic increase in disciplinary research, and in my view, there was the beginning of a rejection of physical education as some people within the disciplines began to distance themselves from their parent physical education. During the 70s, there was a fitness movement, a technology boom. Show that computer there. That was my first Apple II Plus computer in 1978 that allowed us to do things that we couldn't do before. The women's movement in Title IX of 1972, championed by Patsy Mink, led to dramatic changes within our field and our professions. Many of the programs that had been separate were combined into joint men and women's programs. Because of the definitions of the Big Ten Project and others, the subdiscipline areas became well defined as exercise physiology, sports psychology, sports sociology, sport pedagogy, biomechanics, and motor behavior, and science core courses for physical education majors, and what were then called non-teaching majors, later became fitness and kinesiology majors. Everyone had to take a core in the sciences, which was new. For each of these subdisciplines, specialty organizations emerged, and there was a siloing effect as each different people chose what their specialty would be, and people developed interests which were not common to all people. Each organization then developed specialty journals, and history and philosophy, in my view, were minimized. During the next 20-year era of my experience, which an era what I'll call the era of maturing kinesiology, we began to agree on a name. And I elaborated on this in an article in 1989. What's now the National Academy of Kinesiology was then the American Academy of Physical Education. And so move was made to change from physical education to a science name. There was a debate within the academy of whether that field or discipline should be called kinesiology or exercise science. Ultimately, kinesiology won out, and now the academy is named the National Academy of Kinesiology. The trends continued for technology advancement and youth fitness testing, and we had what I call the rise of the corporate university, develop a business model, an emphasis on grants, which meant that the study of disciplinary studies within our field were prioritized over professional studies. Even in lower universities that were not research university, there was what is referred to as mission creep, where research university guidelines were then imposed on institutions and universities which were previously considered to be undergraduate preparation institutions. During the 90s, people developed the subdisciplines, and I call them silos, as each began to work in their own area and not necessarily communicate with each other. Kinesiology as a science emerged, and arts and science majors for undergraduate that were not professional, like physical education, emerged, and many kinesiology majors prepared to be pre-med, pre-veterinary, pre-physical therapy, and so kinesiology to some extent was a pre-professional degree. During the 60s, based on the original work of the London bus study by Morris, epidemiological research became popular. The Harvard alumnus study with Paffenbarger, the Cooper Institute studies with Blair helped us develop future applications. Those began in the era 2001 to the present, the modern era of kinesiology. This is an era of maturing kinesiology where we began to get rid of our inferiority complex of having emerged from physical education. And I feel that there's a newfound disciplinary professional respect, that you're not either in the discipline or the profession, you're in the field, and we can respect each other. The National Academy of Kinesiology began doctoral program reviews. Kinesiology is recognized by the National Research Council, bringing prestige to our field. There was a rise of physical literacy within physical education, and I'll just mention that on the way by, but not elaborate. And physical education, teacher education, commonly called PEAT programs, unfortunately, began to be eliminated in research universities. And that, in my view, is a tragedy. During the modern era, most department names have been changed, typically adopting kinesiology in the name. Organizations have changed their name. As I mentioned, the Academy changed. Shape America was formerly the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. The National Association for Kinesiology and Higher Education was formerly the National Association for Physical Education and Higher Education. So we've come to the point where kinesiology is dominant in the modern era. So now that I've reviewed what I went through historically, I'd like to talk a little bit about the scholarship process and product before I come back to my conclusions. In the 75th anniversary issue of the Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport, they detailed the primary areas of research findings, the product. What did we find out? What did we discover? What is the information that we know? And there are too many for me to list here, and I'm not going to focus on the product. And since this 75th anniversary issue, certainly there have been more kinds of things that have been developed. But for example, in exercise physiology, the health benefits of exercise, the study of blood lipids, body composition, in sports psychology, self-perceptions, motivations, attitudes, sports sociology, socialization, sex roles, discrimination, role conflict, sport pedagogy, conceptual physical education, sport education, teacher observation, methods of styles of teaching and studying teaching behavior that have been championed by Dr. Vandermars and Dr. Tom McKenzie. Biomechanics, movement analysis and study of locomotion, motor behavior, dynamical schema theory, motor control development. These are just a few. What I'd like to focus on, however, is not just the product, but the process. So let's go from then to now briefly. When we did a literature review then, we went to the library and had to go to a special area to get the journals. Those journal areas were closed. You had to get special permission to get in. There were no library copiers, and there was only one copy of each journal. I found when I was doing my review of literature for various articles that often an article of importance would have been cut out of a journal so that somebody could take it home and not have to make another visit to the library, leaving me without the option of finding that article. I often had to go to interlibrary loan to get a copy. We had Thermofax copiers, but they weren't available to students. And interestingly enough, because it used heat to make a copy, those copies are perishable. In preparing my articles for the archives, I found many Thermofax copies which are unusable because the heat has made the print the same color as the rest of the page. There's a message here, and that is start to think about things that you want to save and share with others, because what we had then may not be available now. I'll elaborate. Now, when you do a literature review, you have digital access to libraries, organization journals, open access journals, international research sharing, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, and others. In the process of data collection, one example is from then to now. My first study in 1964 used film with a 16 millimeter camera the film had to be developed, and we analyzed it frame by frame using a film reader like you see at the top here. We've used questionnaire, heart rate monitors, pedometers in sequence in my research, and systematic observation. And if you're interested, look at McKinsey and Vandermar's article of 2015 to learn about SOFIT and SOPLAY. Accelerometers, which one-dimensional, and the CalTrack, and then the TriTrack, three-dimensional monitor, and now multi-component monitors that you have available to you. So things change. When we analyzed the data, we had hand calculations using multiplication and division and calculating. If you were fortunate enough to be able to afford a computer, you could use those. And by the time I did graduate study, we could put our data on punch cards and take them to the university computer, which were in a room, a huge room, with a storage capacity less than is on a thumb drive that you have today. Then we got programmable calculators where you could write it on a little card, the formula, and use a calculator to do calculations. And of course, now you have personal computers with more storage than a mainframe. You can do, you have statistical applications, SPSS, SAS, that can be used on personal computers. University site licenses that make them available to all students, hard drives, thumb drives, and the cloud. When we prepared manuscripts, often they were handwritten, then typed, and we had to mail them or fax them. Why did I put carbon copy in red? This may not translate well to other languages, but CC, when you see it in an email, means carbon copy. That means that when we made a copy in our typewriter, we put a sheet of carbon paper between the first copy and the second copy to type so that we could have a copy of what we were making. Then with the advent of PCs, we got WordStars where we could put 16 pages on a disk, then to Word with disks and zip disks that held more content, and ultimately hard drives and thumb drives. And now we have online emails. One note of caution historically, and I put it in red. As I prepare my materials for the archives of Arizona State University, I am sad to find out that I cannot open many of the disks and the diskettes and the zip disks that I used when I was storing my materials. I was told digital is better than print because you'll be able to store it and not have all that paper. Well, guess what? Most of the things that I'm able to easily access are on paper. That's not to say that we shouldn't use digital stuff. What it is to say that we need to find ways to make sure that we use a universal format. And so I'm now saving documents to text and PDF format so that they can be opened with any computer. When we made presentations, we used overhead transparencies, then slide projectors and diagram or diazochrome slides, such as you see with this yellow, blue, and white. Then we use computer projectors, which many of you use now, first with Persuasion software and then PowerPoint. And we now have webinars like this on Skype and Zoom. The opportunities for presentation are greatly expanded from few organizations to many organizations. For publication, then we have the Research Quarterly as a disciplinary journal, the Physical Educator, and Jopert as teaching and application, and Quest as integration. Many of us had to publish in state journals and proceedings in order to get publications and use journals in other fields. For example, my doctoral dissertation was published in the Journal of General Psychology. Now we have print, online, and open access journals. The American Kinesiology Association identified 98 different English language speaking journals in our field. Shape America now has 4 journals, and the American College of Sports Medicine has 6, all shown here. To conclude, I want to give a few examples of product using the process. Example 1, just think about exercise testing and prescription. How much is exercise and physical activity is enough for improvement. Corbin then developed his heart rate formula in 1957. This led to the FIT formula, which is popular in my text and the texts of others. Cooper did his aerobics book in 1968, showing ways to get fit and how much is enough. Berger and Pollack pioneered research on how much is enough in strength and muscle fitness. And this all led to the American College of Sports guidelines that were started in 1975 and now are in the 11th edition in 2021. So we started with discovery, the epidemiological and the exercise physiology research. It was integrated into guidelines and tested prescription, which are used in application and teaching. This is one example of the process and example. Another is the epidemiological research. How much is enough for health benefits? Morris started it in the 50s with the London bus study. As I mentioned, Paffenbarger and Blair continued the work, which ultimately resulted in the Surgeon General's report on physical activity and health, a landmark report in 1996, edited by Steve Blair, an epidemiologist. Corbin and Pam Gracie developed physical activity guidelines for children in 1998, and in 2008, physical activity guidelines for Americans were created, and a second edition in 2018. I've shown examples of those publications below. We started with discovery, we integrated the material, and then we used it for application and teaching. A third example, in the 1958, AFERD published a youth fitness test. In the 60s, they added an award. The President's Council did a test in 1986. FitnessGram was introduced by the Cooper Institute, a health-related fitness test in 1998. In 2005, FitnessGram combined with AFERD to have a national test by our national organization, and a collaborative FitnessGram was agreed upon in 2012 when Cooper Institute, AFERD, and the President's Council joined to produce the Presidential Youth Fitness Program. In this case, application and teaching began the fitness movement, which led to research and discovery, which was followed by integration and then application and teaching. Example 4, one that's very personal to me. We first started with the college textbook for conceptual physical education, which means teaching with a textbook and a classroom and activity sessions. We did this in the 60s. We implemented college programs and then did studies of effectiveness and found that these programs promoted physical activity, knowledge, and attitudes. High school programs followed in the 70s with the Fitness for Life text, and we did Project Active Teen, where we studied students who took conceptual physical education in grade 9. And we found that 2 years later, they were more active than controls. 2 years after graduation, they were more active than controls. 20 years later, they were more active than age-matched peers. Wong and Chen have found similar results with the middle school CPE project called Science for Healthy Living. This study in 2021 shows that CPE improves knowledge, motivation, and activity among middle school students. So in this case, we were teaching and applying. Then we did the science of discovery, which I've cited here, integrated that and used it to apply and teach. Example 5, self-perceptions. Physical self-perceptions profile developed by Fox and Corbin was based on the psychological theories of Harter in the 1980s. The instrument was validated to show the 4 components of physical self-perception: sport, condition, strength, and body. It's been adapted in multiple languages and widely used and translated. This was an example of integration, followed by discovery, further discovery, and application. Research and self-confidence with girls and women that I've been involved with. We did multiple studies based on the work of Lenny We found that females in physical activity had situational vulnerability and were perceived as and were vulnerable in tasks perceived as general, inappropriate, competitive, evaluative, or lacking experience. Fortunately, since those days, there have been many more opportunities for girls and women, and the self-confidence has appreciated significantly over the years. This is an example of using integration to do discovery and then relate to application in teaching. A couple of closing comments about books as scholarship. During the pre-era of 1900 and 1930, that's when the new physical education was implemented. During that period, 93% of the National Academy of Kinesiology members were authors of textbooks. From 1931, as we advanced HPER, the textbooks led the way, and 75% of NAK fellows were textbook authors. What I call between 60 and 80, where we prepared teachers for disciplinary classes because many people had to teach them without knowledge, textbooks led the way, and 75% and 74% were of National Academy fellows were authors, and that's decreased more dramatically, indicating that there seems to be less respect for textbooks as scholarship now as in the past. I would counter that with this very busy table, which basically shows that if scientific citations are the evidence of scholarship, textbooks fare very well. So in the beginning, I said I would have several messages. I said history matters. We learn from the past. It helps us adapt to the future. It does matter. Philosophy matters. Ethics and scholarship is essential. Ethics and philosophy provide us with direction. I said things change. Adaptation is essential to success. Societal, academic, and technical changes make for changes in our field, as I've tried to show. Scholarly expectations change. They're a moving target. What I had to do when I started is different. I had to learn many new skills, just as you will, and being adaptable is important. For example, when I started, any journal got you scholarly points. Then selected journals were necessary. Then journals only in the area of focus were considered important. Then the impact factor became into play. Is a journal a good journal based on that? And of course, now grants are expectation of the corporate university. Even though you're not prepared to focus in some of these areas, you need to be attuned to the changes that are taking place and prepare for change. And I ask you to reach outside of your specialty and collaborate with others in your area, so as a field we can move forward and move out of our silos. So what's in the future? Well, it's a double-edged sword. I don't know what will happen, just as I didn't know that I would be where I am today 60 years ago. What about artificial intelligence? What's going to be the effect of remote learning? My view is that we need to develop a culture of scholarship as advocated by DeHart, and that is the importance of mentoring, that we need to be careful of degrees that are only offered online, because students to develop scholarship need to be immersed in a culture of scholarship where they have good mentoring, student-mentor discourse, develop networks with other scholars, and apply multiple opportunities for scholarly work. At the beginning, I said, Park said that we could be the Renaissance field of the 21st century, just as medicine was for the 20th century. The kinesiology professions are now multiple, well beyond physical education. We move from our scientific beginnings to establish strong training programs and have a strong scientific base in the discipline, but it's equally important to have strong professions with solid ethics, concerns for learners, clients, and patients. Our field includes both the disciplines and the profession. One is not more important than the other. Each depends on the other. The scholarship message of common goals and different rules simply says that all of us in the field, whether disciplinary or professional, should work toward common goals and serve our different roles and respect the roles of others, whether disciplinary, professional, and this, of course, depends on your situation. We should have respect for all forms of scholarship, as I've outlined, and work for cohesion versus fragmentation. We've come a long way. Where we will be in the future, only time will tell. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and we sincerely appreciate your thorough review of our field, kinesiology, with historical, empirical, evidence-based, scientific, and educational information. We believe that this lecture and information you just provided us will be very useful and helpful for undergraduate, graduate, master's, doctoral students, physical education teachers, as well as researchers and professors in the field of health, sports, and kinesiology. Again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, and if I can dovetail on Ho-Soon's comment, this recording should be made available well beyond the organization's members. This should be required listening for and viewing for anyone in kinesiology, especially the current generation and future generations, because it offers a wonderful glimpse backwards and also a great overview of what's to come. So, Chuck, you were magnificent as always.
Thank you.
That was an excellent overview, and I support what Hans said in that others should know about it. And in the evolution of things, I too started as an elementary school physical education teacher and have changed over time. I taught at universities, and current research is in parks and recreation in NIH grants run by an MD, and so it's very, very different from what I started with. But my heart is still in teaching physical education, and that's why we developed programs such as Spark and Catch, etc., so that those who don't have an opportunity to get a thorough background at least have a template of how to conduct lessons, and it includes in there the appropriate biomechanical cues for doing things, such as follow through, that all of us on the all of the faces here do know about. And so thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I learned a lot.